So here we are doing the fourth recording of the Is Mind Leela, and in the previous recording, Julie described her first day at the Mountain of Attention and being in the bathhouse with beloved Adida. And now you'll go on with a more general description of what you were doing at the Mountain of Attention with beloved and some of the details of your life there at the time. So over to you.
I was graced to be given a room to share with Nina at Goatswool, which is one of the buildings on the Mountain of Attention where devotees live. And I was also able to make use of all of the holy sites in the meditation halls, and also to be able to go directly to his house, the Manor of Flowers, to serve him and participate there with a number of devotees, male and female, to serve him daily. And the place where I was living, Goatswool, is right next to another building that is called the Pavilion. And this is a place where gatherings would happen, presentations would happen, sacred pujas would happen. Beloved would come and speak there. A lot of the avataric discourses that occurred later on in his life happened there, and many discourses throughout all the years. And this building is next to a place that was originally called Great Food Dish. It's changed its name and purposes over the years, but at this specific time, it was turned into the studio where Adida was doing images and making photo shoots. And he was also given a space that was a place where he could sequence the images. And there was also an area where there were many technicians that were helping him do what was necessary to make the photo shoots. And there was also an area where the models would be able to prepare. And so it's a large building, and there were many devotees involved in this whole event of his image making. And it was really ecstatic because the whole time that he was actually in this space, devotees would be chanting the Da Om chant. And it was just the simple invocation of Da Om, Om Da, Da Om, Om Da, in various forms, and different devotees, either alone or with others, would invoke him through this invocation. And this occurred the entire time while the shoots were happening. This invocation also happened in his home, and there was always the form of this chanting, sacred invocation, occurring on the sanctuary in various ways. In this particular building where he was doing the photo shoots and creating the images for this particular suite, the technicians had built a room for him that was made out of black fabric that made a square space. And within this square space, Adida would ask for certain forms to be placed in the space, and there would be light that would come into this room that would enable him to shoot the model, myself, sitting in a chair or simply standing, and then also projected onto the fabric sometimes, or even a screen that would come down behind me. There would be other images that would be superimposed. The chair that was the chair from the Revolution, the Civil War that occurred in the U.S. was placed in there. So this space had to be very dark, and it was also very still, apart from the chanting going on. And the artists and the technicians who were helping him compose these events, they were behind the black fabric screening. And so there was no one who was in the room apart from Beloved and myself. And then sometimes there were devotees who were able to peek through or peer through or respond to Beloved in his requests for assistance in the shoots being made and the images being made. When he began to do these shoots with me, apart from my direct relationship and response to him devotionally, there was also his consistent communication to me at his home or in the bathhouse or through other devotees, communicating to me about his image art making and the significance of it. Now, this actually goes way back to the very beginning of my relationship. He began to speak to me about art from 1976 because I was an art student and this was a passion of mine also. So he was always very enthusiastic with speaking to me about his image art making and wanting me to understand everything about the details of why and how he was doing it, and the esoteric understanding of it. So there was this reciprocation and dialogue that was going on in the midst of also the silence and the stillness of him as he was actually photographing me. And one of the things that I remember that was very, I was told was unusual, was that I was the first model that he used alone. That I was the only model that was used for this suite, and it was the first suite that became color. Previous to this, he was always shooting in black and white. And the other thing was that I didn't move freely, so to speak, of my own responsiveness of movement. He actually guided me in absolutely everything that I did, even from whether I opened my eyes or closed them, opened my mouth or closed it, which direction I turned my head, how I was sitting in the chair, whether I was crossing my ankles, whether I wasn't, whether I was standing and where my arms would be placed. And also in the midst of this very understanding that all that was occurring in this room was his person, his instruction, his making the images, and the feeling of his being in this space and him mastering me in this. And he brought me into and woke up, reignited everything that he had initiated in my relationship to him prior to that moment in time, so that I was able to sit or stand or respond to him in the disposition of being established in the consciousness domain, simply witnessing and aware of how he was working. So in the midst of this simplicity and this silence and this being completely infidelity to his mastery in this situation, he showed me so much about his world work and his work with his devotees and with all beings. And I would see it actually visually in visions, and I would feel it in terms of the all-inclusive nature of it. It was very clear that every move he made, everything he asked of me was completely integrated with his work altogether. And I can't say much more about it because at a certain point it just became an incomprehensibility, as he describes. And I didn't know what he was doing. I wasn't in that asana. I was sitting, just sitting and witnessing and being aware in his feeling of being while this was occurring. And it would always surprise me afterwards when I would see the images later on and be absolutely amazed with what he had created. So when you are able to actually view this suite and participate in it, that will be the only context within which you will really understand what he accomplished here and what it is that he is offering through his image art, which is his person. It is the revelation of reality itself and the bride itself. And it's a participatory process. And he asked us very specifically in relationship to his image art to not talk too much about it as an objective other, analyzing it or imagining it or philosophizing about it, because really it is only the direct relationship, participating in it as a sacred event, that you will be able to receive what it is that he is giving and be able to respond, because the context will be as he described as necessary.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned to me that when he was using you as a model, that he was not only instructing you verbally, but he would come and move your face, move your arms, wipe away tears and things like that.
Yes, right. Thank you. When it became clear that I was a vessel for his use, my being became combined with everything that he was doing, so that there wasn't a separate sense of me apart from him. And as Nick is describing, because of his direct instruction of me, he was actually coming over and touching me. And when I was seeing the visions of his bright intervention into these dark times, I was actually seeing horrific images of dark places and spaces and wars that were happening and destruction, and it was making me weep. And to see his heart intention in relationship to the world, and he would take his hands and he would wipe the tears from my face and from my chest, and his verbal expression of the reciprocation. And it was prior to any knowledge whatsoever of what he was doing. I couldn't comprehend it. I just knew that I was graced to be there, just to simply be there. And it was such a profound matter to be able to participate in this process with him.
Were the images typically of dark events, or was there a myriad of different types of imagery that you experienced, or direct perception of his work at perhaps at a subtle level?
Well, unfortunately, it was mainly dark, except that the room itself wasn't dark, because I was there in his darshan. I was in his bright room, his being. The love intimacy was the context of all of what it was that he was working with. So there was the bright, the feeling, awareness of the bright domain of his being, and what he had initiated at the Lopez event was very obvious, and the instruction that he had given me at that time was just allowing his descent and breathing and being conducted by that fully coming down and then enveloping, and the bright above and beyond. And in this, there was the ecstasy and the joy of standing free in relationship to what it was that I saw him working with also. Does that answer your question?
And another question, was this process you're describing specific to only occurring within the photographic suite, or it was all the time you were there with beloved Adida during this time?
Yes. So as I think I mentioned earlier, is that it was all integrated. There wasn't anything inside or outside the space of his being that was different than what he was actually revealing and doing with me in the shoot. And I observed this as I entered into his studio, as he did the created the images. But I also noticed this when I was observing him looking at the images after he had made them and they were returned to him. They were developed, the images were developed very quickly. And I noticed that as he would communicate to the devotees who were serving the different aspects of the process that he was involved in, he was having to work with the density or the limitations or the resistance of the manifestation of his intervention and the work of what he was doing. As we were there, we were not separate from the world and the spaces of the darkness that the ego act creates. So I was experiencing that in my own being, seeing the limitations and seeing the limitations in devotees, even as we were on the sanctuary and giving ourselves completely over the best that we could and were able to do given our maturity or our lack of maturity. He was always working, constantly working with instructing or giving lessons, while at the same time this event always occurring in the sphere of his bright person. He instructed his Gurukula, he instructed the participants in this process, he instructed all of those who were most intimate servants in his house, both men and women. There were many devotees coming on retreat during this period of time. There were also patrons who were coming to have darshan of him during this time. So this period was very expansive, really inclusive. The sanctuary was open. There was so much that was occurring around him altogether. And constantly, as he called me to, he wanted me to observe and to be sensitive to what was actually happening and sensitive to how it was affecting him, sensitive to how it was affecting his work, sensitive to how it was affecting what he described as the mandala that was necessary to be established around him. So this was part of the process. And
you're saying that he asked you specifically to do that?
Yes, and he remember when he gave me the notes about being aware of the structures and being aware of, he wanted me to be aware of the practice that was occurring around him. He had called me to a certain way of relating to him and a practice that he had called me to engage while I was there with him. So this wasn't anything new, though. What he called us to individually and also as a collective and also unique to each form or function or role of service. We knew what we were called to do. And he spoke very directly to each one of us about what we were to do for him and with him, whether it be on his body, whether it be serving his meals or making his meals, whether it be caring for him and his well-being, whether it be taking care of the holy sites, whether it be managing the sanctuary, whether it be being participants in this particular art making process. He gave very specific instructions about how to serve him and what our unique roles were. So as usual, and as consistent with the way he worked with me, it was always about being sensitive to how it affected him bodily and to be aware of the necessity of the right relationship between those who were with him and serving him directly. I was always actually called to attend to him, to protect him, to take care of his body. And so when I became vividly aware, visually and through sensation, tacitly through touch, I was aware the toll that this was taking on his body, and especially as he had described what had occurred and what I observed and participated in his Outshining Brightness event at Lopez, and the sacred nature through which we had to relate to him spiritually and no longer require him to have to submit to our inabilities to serve him rightly. We actually needed to be fully surrendered in order for him to be able to accomplish his work, bring it all the way down, breathe and conduct it, and to be able to function in that, for him to create, to manifest his treasures, and then to be able to care for them most fully. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything more?
Not for now.
Yeah. So, in him asking this of me, one of the things that he wanted me to do was to communicate to the worldwide gathering why I was there. And partly why this also occurred was because I did become aware again that he was not pleased at times with the responses, and he was having to work through the dredge, the density, the resistance, the dullness of being able to keep up with him and to stay in the process with him as quickly as he was moving, and with whatever it was that he was working with on his body or extending all the way out universally. And then, as a responsibility, he called those who were around him to varying degrees for us to turn out to serve the gathering and the culture in different ways to help them understand this. And so he called me to do this in a presentation. Now, I wasn't really taking notes, and this occurred this way often. As I described earlier, I didn't really like the communications process per se, but that doesn't mean that I didn't go out to communicate or educate or to culturally serve. I would sit with him and make a confession to him, and upon the basis of that confession, then he would indicate, well, this would be good to communicate to the gathering. And so that's how I would end up going out to serve. It wasn't as if I was just coming out to give notes.
This you're describing specifically what happened here in 2002, but as I understand it, in earlier times, he would give you a specific topic to go and talk to the gathering about.
Yes. Yeah, you might remember that.
I remember on the island, in the late 80s and early 90s, you and the other Kanyas doing all kinds of presentations, and as I understand it, he would school you, so to speak, and talk with you about the presentation and define the presentation with you prior to you coming out to give it.
That's right. And it wasn't scripted unless there were specific notes that we took verbatim, or notes that had been then recorded and typed out and then read out. Sometimes I did that, but that wasn't really one of my primary functions. I remember being in a bit of a double bind about this, because what I really wanted to do was just to stay there and be in his intimate sphere. And this triggered a memory of a period of time after the divine self-emergence where Adida had to himself begin to address the gathering, saying that the mandala is being broken because the response isn't happening from his person on out, not meaning that he was at the center or core. I mean, you could spatially describe it that way, but that's really not the nature of his person. But he was describing that the whole mandala, the sphere, had to function in a manner in which we would serve the process, and our roles would always be different. But he had indicated that after the divine self-emergence, that it was going to be required of us to have to turn out, specifically speaking to Kwandra Sukapur and myself, that we would turn out to help the culture understand how to serve him rightly. And I remember feeling, and I think he had expressed, that that was a bit unfortunate that we had to do that, because then it meant that it took us away from being able to attend to him as we were meant to do. And it wasn't just the four Kanyas. There were many that were required to be more in his intimate sphere. And then as you would then determine what he would determine, or give you what your service or role was. And then he'd not only do that, he'd also then instruct you about your practice and what was necessary to bring integrity to what you were doing. And this was constantly happening during this period of time while I was here. So there was the blessing grace of simply being in his company in the ecstasy of his divine self-revelation. There was his instruction and his confession about it, but there was also the bite of the criticism of the limits that we were bringing into the sphere of his work still.
So going back to the presentation, he asked you to go and give a presentation to the gathering about why you were there. What was the context for that?
Yeah, well, that was a context in which he was indicating to the entire gathering that he wasn't feeling everyone participating with him rightly. And this corresponds with what he described as the 5 issues originally, that later on became the 9 laws of the right devotional relationship to him. And he wanted me to describe to the gathering, why I was there and why he needed to have a larger sphere of renunciates around him, that it couldn't be just 1 or 2. There needed to be more, a certain number that could actually provide the services and the different qualities that were required to make everything full around him. And that was dependent upon all of the patterned convergences that were required in order for him to work with everyone and everything, as has been described previously in his working with the coins. So it was this kind of a presentation that I was giving, and I honestly don't remember the details of the presentation. It would be recorded. It would be in the archives. I do remember that it was very fiery, and I do remember that because I was a bit miffed, I could use that word, about turning out, although yes, it was somehow or other a feeling of a responsibility, that it wasn't just okay for me to sit next to his body and be blissed out while he was upset. I needed to do something about it. So when I would go out, I feel that I created a bit of a drama around that and became a bit abusive, or a bit too critical, or demanding in relationship to the devotees. I lost my patience a bit. Well, maybe people didn't notice that. I think maybe some people did. Anyway, there were my own qualities that were liabilities that were beginning to be seen because I was feeling his upset again. That was very difficult for me to be around. That being the case, he continued to engage in this process directly, and we continued to, all of those, not just myself, but participate in the shoot with him. I was typically not clothed, and I would just have some very simple jewelry on me. I didn't have a whole lot of makeup on. I wasn't presenting myself as a female being beautiful. That wasn't what I was imaging myself at all as. I was just simply present there with him.
Didn't he at one point make some suggestion that there was something not quite right about the body and you wanted to iron it out?
Oh, yes, yes. So I had obviously begun to age, and I began to have a bit of cellulite on my thighs. And at one point, he said, "Can somebody iron out her skin?" When he was doing the shoot. So one of the devotees, Gina, came over with some whiteout, and she would make little marks. I guess it was obvious to her what Beloved was speaking about, just as a way of working with my perhaps being a bit embarrassed about the fact that, well, I'm not as beautiful as I used to be. I am aging, but oddly enough, in that gesture, that brought tears to my eyes because of his humor and his gentle love. And then this devotee coming up to me very gently to serve. And it felt like a washing that was being done, and I could let go of self-consciousness even more so, and then be brought to depth. Actually, this corresponded to him actually asking me to stand up, because previously I had only been sitting in a chair. And at this point, I actually was standing. So there was some images of me standing and just not moving at all while he continued to make the images. When you see the images, you will be amazed at what he created. I'm not even visible in a lot of the images. And then at a later time, he began to introduce not just the images that he shot of me in that set, that was the apparently dark space or the square of manifest form, and then his bright light manifest in the room itself. He also made use of many of his own image arts, drawings or paintings or photographs, and made use of dictionary images. of iconographic forms. The he and the she, a man and a woman. There were images of forests. There were images of an apple. Obviously, there was the chair. There was words that were used. There was his writing that was used. So there, he began to superimpose and to combine many, many elements to create the images that created the suite. I think that's probably good for now. I'd like to describe some more details of that, but I think that's enough for this moment.